Charles Obi was 27, young, handsome, and heir to an empire that stretched across oil, real estate, and international trade. On the surface, he had it all. Designer suits, luxury cars parked like trophies in the garage, a penthouse apartment on Victoria Island, and a sprawling family mansion in Ikoyi that could rival a palace. But wealth, as Charles knew too well, could not fill emptiness. Most mornings he woke to silence. His father, Chief Obi, was already in a meeting by 6 a.m., planning his next business conquest. His mother, Lady Obi, was never around. She lived more in Europe than in Nigeria, flying between Paris, Milan, and London in search of luxury. His friends in Lagos society cared more for popping champagne at clubs in Lekki than for genuine companionship. Even with all the glitz surrounding him, Charles often found himself sitting alone in the cavernous living room, staring at the chandelier's golden glow. Sometimes he wondered, was this all there was to life? It was in this space of loneliness that Adaeze entered his world. She arrived on a humid Monday morning, brought in by the senior house steward. 17 years old, she had the kind of beauty that was not loud but quietly striking. Her brown skin glowed like polished wood, and her eyes, bright yet cautious, carried the weight of someone who had seen hardship far too early. Adaeze had grown up in the village, raised by her grandmother after losing her parents in a tragic road accident. When the steward introduced her to the household staff, she stood nervously, clutching her small bag, dressed in a plain gown with a faded headscarf tied neatly over her hair. Charles noticed her from the upstairs balcony. She wasn't like the other maids who moved about with hurried obedience. There was a stillness in her presence, an air of quiet dignity despite her position. He caught himself staring longer than he should have. Later that evening, she came into the sitting room to serve him a glass of juice. Her hands trembled slightly as she set it on the table. For the briefest moment their eyes met. She looked away quickly, whispering, "Good evening, sir." Something stirred in Charles then, a strange warmth, a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. In a mansion filled with emptiness, Adaeze's presence was like a spark in the dark. And though he didn't yet know it, that spark would ignite a fire that would change everything. First, Charles and Adaeze lived in different worlds, separated by more than just wealth. He was the master of the house, moving through marble hallways in tailored suits, while she was the maid, her footsteps soft against the tiles as she carried trays and dusted antiques. Yet, their paths kept crossing in ways Charles couldn't ignore. It began with the smallest of things. One afternoon, Charles wandered into the kitchen, restless after a morning of emails and phone calls. The air smelled faintly of fried plantain, and over the clatter of pots, he heard it, a soft hum. It was Adaeze washing plates, her voice carrying a tune of an old Igbo folk song. "Do you sing often?" Charles asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. Adaeze jumped, startled, her hands nearly dropping a plate. "Ah, sir, I didn't know you were here. Forgive me." Charles smiled, amused by her panic. "No need to apologize. I was only listening. You have a nice voice." Her cheeks flushed. "Thank you, sir." She quickly bent her head back to her work, trying to hide her shyness. But Charles lingered, watching her. There was nothing extraordinary about the scene. A girl washing dishes, humming softly. But to him it felt different. It was the first time in a long while that something in his life felt real, and the days that followed, Charles found excuses to speak to her. He would ask unnecessary questions about meals, or appear in the kitchen when he knew she would be there. At first, Adaeze answered politely, always careful to keep her tone respectful. But slowly, she began to smile when he entered, and her voice grew warmer, less formal. One evening after dinner, Charles stopped her as she cleared the table. "Adaeze," he said softly, "do you ever think about your future? About what you want beyond this house?" She looked at him, surprised by the question. "Yes, sir. I dream of going to school. To be a nurse one day. But dreams are expensive." She laughed faintly, almost bitterly. "For now I just work." Something inside Charles shifted. Unlike the women he had dated, Adaeze didn't talk about fashion shows in London or luxury vacations in Dubai. She spoke of sacrifice, of survival, of dreams she held tightly even though life tried to pry them away. That night he couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in his mind. Her laughter lingering like a melody he couldn't shake off. The first gift came a week later. Charles had gone to Lekki to buy a new phone for himself, and on impulse, he returned with a second one. That evening, he handed it to Adaeze. She froze, staring at the shiny box in his hands. "Sir, this is too much. I can't accept it." "Yes, you can," Charles insisted gently. "Think of it as an investment in your dreams. You need a phone if you're going to study one day." She hesitated, then finally reached for it with trembling fingers. "Thank you, sir. I will never forget this kindness." And when she smiled, really smiled, Charles felt something warm spread through his chest. He didn't know it yet, but that smile was the beginning of his undoing. It started small, an invitation to join him for a short drive when the mansion felt too quiet. At first, Adaeze refused, insisting it wasn't her place. But Charles's persistence wore her down. One Saturday evening, he convinced her to step into his black Range Rover. She sat nervously, her hands folded in her lap, while he steered them out of Ikoyi's leafy streets into the bright lights of Victoria Island. Lagos at night was alive. Hawkers weaving between cars, neon signs flashing above lounges, the ocean breeze carrying salt and the faint smell of suya. "Relax," Charles said, noticing how stiff she was. "You're safe with me." Slowly, she began to loosen. He drove her along the Lekki Ikoyi Bridge, the city lights glittering like stars reflected on the lagoon. Adeeze's eyes widened with wonder. "I've never been on this bridge before," she whispered. Charles smiled. "Get used to it. There's more to Lagos than the walls of that mansion." Soon their outings became frequent. Charles bought her clothes that transformed her from a shy maid into a young woman who could blend in at upscale restaurants. At a rooftop bar overlooking Eco-Atlantic, she laughed so hard at his stories that other guests turned to stare. For Charles, that laughter was intoxicating. It wasn't fake, wasn't polished. It was raw, alive, and it made him feel more human than all the boardrooms and luxury gatherings ever had. "Why me?" Adaeze asked one night as they ate dinner by candlelight in Lekki. "You could be with any woman in Lagos. Women more beautiful, more suitable." Charles leaned forward, his eyes on hers. "Because you don't treat me like the billionaire's son. You see me. Just Charles." Her lips curved into a shy smile, and for a moment, Charles felt he had finally found what he had been searching for. Something real. But reality wasn't so simple. Back at the mansion, the other staff whispered. They noticed the gifts, her new phone, her jewelry, the perfume she suddenly wore. Some envied her, some scorned her. But Adaeze seemed unfazed. She walked with her head high, her steps light, as if she had been waiting for someone like Charles to lift her out of poverty. For Charles it was love. For Adaeze, it was opportunity. And in those glittering Lagos nights filled with laughter, Charles was too blinded by hope to see the shadows forming behind her smile. The more Charles gave, the more Adaeze seemed to need. At first, it was little things. Money for her grandmother's medicine, funds for her younger brother's school fees. Charles never questioned her. Love blinded him. He believed every word, every tear. But doubt crept in quietly. She was often unavailable, slipping away on her days off with vague excuses. Sometimes she would return late, her perfume different, her laughter distant. One Saturday night, after leaving a business dinner on the mainland, Charles drove through Surulere. His mind was heavy, but what he saw on that street corner almost made him slam the brakes. There was Adaeze. Not in her maid's uniform, but in one of the dresses he had bought her. Red, elegant, too fine for the streets. Beside her stood a young man, tall, rough around the edges. His arm resting on her waist with the confidence of someone who owned her heart. Charles's chest tightened. His eyes fell on the watch wrapped around the man's wrist. It was his gift. He had given it to Adaeze only days earlier. He didn't confront them that night. Instead, he sat in his car, engine idling, as the truth stabbed him again and again. Every laugh she had shared with him, every smile he thought was pure, it all shattered in that moment. The next evening, he waited for her in the garden of the mansion. She arrived, unsuspecting, carrying a tray of fruit. "Adaeze," Charles said, his voice low but sharp. "Who is he?" She froze. Who do you mean, sir?" "The man you were with last night. The one wearing my watch." Adaeze's lips trembled. For a moment, she looked like she might tell the truth. But then, as if rehearsed, tears welled in her eyes. "He's my cousin," she whispered. "Please, Charles, you don't understand. I would never betray you." Charles stared at her, his heart torn between anger and the desperate hope that she was telling the truth. But deep inside he knew. The truth came later from another maid, envious but brutally honest. Kunle was not a cousin. He was Adaeze's boyfriend, her real lover, the man she had been with long before she entered the Obi mansion. Every gift Charles gave, every naira he spent, had gone to support their secret romance. That night, Charles confronted her one last time. "Tell me," he demanded, his voice shaking, "was I ever anything more than a wallet to you?" Adaeze dropped to her knees, weeping, reaching for his hand. "Charles, He pulled away. His heart felt like stone. "Pack your things. Tonight." Her cries echoed in the grand halls, but he didn't look back. The girl he had once seen as his escape from loneliness was gone, replaced by a stranger who had taught him the harshest lesson of all. Not everyone drawn to love comes with clean hands. When the gates closed behind her that night, Charles stood alone in the garden, the Lagos night heavy around him. For the first time, he wasn't the naive son of a billionaire. He was a man scarred, wiser and colder. And though his heart still ached, he swore one thing. Never again would he let anyone use his love as a mask for their greed. The mansion was empty again, but now so was his soul. Months after Adaeze was sent away, the Obi mansion remained as silent as ever. Charles had thrown himself into his father's business, determined to prove that he was more than just a spoiled heir. He started small, overseeing the shipping division, learning every detail about oil contracts, and working late into the night. The parties in Ikoyi went on without him. The friends who once flooded his phone with invitations soon stopped calling when they realized he had no interest in funding their excesses. Charles didn't care. The heartbreak had carved something new in him, an understanding that wealth could buy comfort, but never sincerity. In a cramped one-room apartment in Surulere, Adaeze sat on a worn mat, tears staining her face. Kunle had taken everything, the money, the gifts, even the gold necklace Charles had given her, and disappeared. Neighbors whispered when they saw her, shaking their heads. The life she thought she was building with Kunle had crumbled into dust. Sometimes late at night she thought of Charles. Of the way he looked at her like she was more than a maid, more than her poverty. She remembered his laughter, his kindness, the sincerity in his eyes. And she wept, for she knew she had traded true love for fleeting pleasures. Charles, meanwhile, would sometimes drive past the lagoon at night, the city lights shimmering on the water. He thought of Adaeze, of the girl who had awakened his heart and then broken it. And though his chest ached, he found strength in the pain. He would build a life of his own, not to prove anything to Adaeze, not to please his father, but to become a man who needed no validation from wealth or false love. The mansion was still quiet. But this time, Charles did not feel empty. He had learned that love without loyalty is betrayal, and that sometimes the greatest wealth a man can have is wisdom gained through heartbreak. And with that, his new journey began. The end.